Hi chess fans, welcome to this video. We will look at the game from 1964 between Anthony Saidy with white and Bobby Fischer with black. The game was played in the last round of the US Championship, the 11th round, and Bobby Fischer had won all of the 10 games before, all of them, 10 out of 10. And this was the last game, and Saidy was in second place at this moment and didn't want to yield to Bobby Fischer winning all of the games. So very, very interesting setting. And so Anthony Saidy played c4. Bobby Fischer responded with c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, c takes, knight f6. So knight f6 attempts to take e4 out of the position, and so white now only has e3, which blocks the bishop, or the slow plan bishop g2. Anthony continued with knight c3, e6, opening up the diagonal for the bishop, and now knight d/b5, attempting to take advantage of the fact that black has not played a6 yet, and also eyeing the d6 square. But black has a strong response, bishop b4, and what is the purpose of this move? Now the knight is pinned, and black is threatening knight to e4, attacking this knight. And so white really got a bit nervous about this, and probably it would have been better to simply continue quiet with something like this, or maybe even bishop here. But white played a3, asking the bishop immediately, and Bobby Fischer took, and knight takes, and in this position after d5, black has already a very comfortable position because two knights are developed, the pawns are developed, and black is a little bit underdeveloped and yet has to show what this move really yielded for him. After e3, because black was also threatening pushing the pawns forward and blocking white's position even more, Bobby played castle, and after c takes, e takes, black ended up with an isolated pawn. So is this pawn in this position strong or weak? What do you think? So actually in this position the pawn is quite strong, and the reason is most of the times if you have an isolated pawn, you want to see, can I push the pawn forward? And in this particular position the pawn is strong because it's relatively easy to push the pawn forward. Both the queen and the knight coordinate with the pawn, and also the king is still in the middle. It will take black a few moves to move the king out of the center, and that gives black the chance also to put the rook on the e file, which makes the pawn push that much stronger. Okay, so it's actually Bobby Fischer was happy to have an isolated pawn because it's actually quite strong in this position. Okay, white continued bishop to e2, wanting to get the king out of the center as soon as possible. Develop bishop f5. And somehow white loves this bishop on b5. I'm not really sure what the knight is doing here. It's a little bit unclear to me why white cannot castle. Probably black can then play d4, attacking the knight, and so after this position, are there some nasty tactics here? Bishop b3. Looks like white is okay, so maybe that would have been a better option. So, but white loves the bishop, the knight on b5, and after queen b6, castle, asking the knight, okay, what do you want to do here? The knight moves to the center, And in this position here, black took the knight on d4. And the point is that after e takes, black's pieces are really well developed and coordinate well. The queen is ready to attack those two weaknesses, while the b7 pawn and the d5 pawn are a little bit more difficult to attack. Black is also ready to come in with the rook, which coordinates really nicely with the bishop. So, or with the rook on the f5. So that looks pretty good for black. That's why white was taking with the queen. And in this position, after queen takes, e takes, we are reaching an ending. And already a little bit of a heads up, you know, why was black so happy, even though he was having such a detailed development? Why was black so happy to exchange the queen here? Well, it turns out black gets nice pressure here with rook to c8. The rook is ready to penetrate the white position on c2. And white really only can protect that square with the bishop. And now black plays something very curious. Black is interested, is offering the exchange of bishops. And white is denying this, and then black even exchanges the bishop here. So one question to have in mind is, why is black happy to exchange here? Okay, the rook takes, the rook penetrates, so that might be one reason for the exchange. The rook penetrates, and you know, in endings, if we get an advantage, we are happy to exchange pieces to get this advantage, and then if that advantage is enough to win, we don't need the pieces. So after rook d2, white really has to push the emergency brake and exchange everything to reach this ending. Okay, so again, let's go back to this position here. In this position here, black was very happy to exchange everything. First the knight, then the queen, then the bishop, and then both of the rooks. So what is it about this ending that Fischer was so interested in? So how do you evaluate this endgame? Would you prefer to be white or would you prefer to be black? Now it looks like in this position here, we have pawns on both sides of the board. So normally this would favor the bishop, right? And also we say bishops are typically a little bit stronger than knights. So maybe my first response would be, okay, I would like to have white here with the bishop. But what's the point? Why did Bobby Fischer exchange into this endgame? The big feature of this position is the pawn here on d4. The pawn is on the dark squares, as is the dark squared bishop. And in fact, it turns out this pawn is blocking the mobility of this bishop quite a lot. At the same time, the pawn on d5 is a very safe pawn. It cannot be attacked. Unless the king penetrates all the way into the position, this pawn is super strong here on d5. On the other hand, the knight can always attack the pawn on d4. So this pawn is a liability because it can be attacked by the knight, who can attack pawns on both colored squares, and it is a liability because it's blocking this bishop. So look at the engine. The engine, of course, says that this is dead equal, and probably objectively it is. But this is an ending that Bobby Fischer was very happy to play. So how to go about this ending? It's quite instructive. The rest of the game until Bobby Fischer wins this ending, and it's, we are looking at like some more moves, like some 100 more moves. We're going to go through them quickly. No, some 30 more moves. I have grouped them in 7 stages, and let's just jump right into it. So in this position here, let me just scroll up here. In this position here, Bobby Fischer played knight to d7. Okay, we don't have to understand this move yet. We'll get to it. The king moves towards the center. Knight to e8. What's going on? King e2. and knight to e6. And black has completed the first stage. And the first stage was to reroute the knight from here to e6. Why? Because the knight here attacks the d4 pawn. And the consequence of this is from now on, one of white's pieces will have to be busy protecting the pawn on d4. That's the first stage. So the king is now moving to d3 and has to stay here because the knight is attacking this pawn, and this pawn has to be protected. Okay, that is the first stage. Can you guess what is now the second stage for black? Let's have a look at the game. Bobby Fischer played h5, bishop e3, king h7, f3, king g6, a4, king f5. And this is the second stage, centralizing the king. Bobby Fischer figured the best way to centralize the king is to push this pawn forward, control this square, and then move the king via this route here to f5, where the king is centralized and it cannot so easily be hassled by white's pawn. So in this position here, rather than, for example, walking like this, black chose to centralize the king like this. Okay, good technique. The king is now centralized. Stage 2 is completed. Okay, what can white do? One of the pieces now always has to guard this pawn, and that's a pretty good position for black. Now, what is the next stage? The next stage is a little bit boring because, in fact, we have now reached move 29, and the remaining moves highlight that white doesn't have so many counter opportunities, but essentially the goal of this stage is to reach move 40. So both sides move the pieces a little bit back and forth, and in this position here, Bobby Fischer has played move 40 and reached the time control. So that is maybe stage 3. Okay, what is the next stage now? The knight is has been rerouted to be a bit more active on this side as well, but is still keeping the bishop busy here, so the bishop cannot move somewhere else, otherwise this pawn would fall. Okay, and the king is still centralized and the pawns have been pushed forward. What is the next stage? What is the next stage? So let's have a look. King d3, and what is Bobby Fischer playing now? g4, does this sack a pawn? Takes, takes, takes. No, it doesn't sack a pawn because the pawn can be won back. And stage 4 is completed. And what was stage 4 all about? Why did Bobby Fischer want to move from here to here? The goal was to create space for the king to penetrate. The knight can reroute back, and the king can then penetrate on the light squares where the bishop cannot stop the king. So the goal of stage 4 was to create space for the king to penetrate. Okay. Bishop d2 attacking the pawn, king protects, bishop e1, knight is rerouted, bishop h4 attacks the knight, knight e4, bishop e1, king g4. Okay, we have now completed stage 5, and what is the property of stage 5? What has black achieved now? The king moved forward a little bit, yes, but what does that mean? What this means is that from now on, the progress that black has made is from now on every endgame where the pieces are exchanged is won for black. So for example, if if king e2, knight g3 check, king back, and now if this if the pieces were exchanged, so for example, if let's just imagine black was playing this move, and then these pieces get exchanged, then all the pawn endings are won for black. Black will win this pawn, and then this pawn will march forward, and even if white goes and somehow stops this pawn, the white king can take this pawn and then win the game. So this stage 5 was to reach a position of pieces where the king is penetrated so much that any ending where the pieces get exchanged is 1 now for black. That is a huge progress. And if those pieces were not on the board, every ending is 1 now. And see, now finally the engine also gives +2 for black. This is some advantage that is very, very permanent. Okay, what's the next stage? Black has now reached stage 5. What is stage 6? Okay, king e2, let's have a look. Knight g3. So again, the pieces cannot be exchanged because all the endings are 1. So the king has to move back. What would happen if king here? Then we would have knight f5, attacking the pawn, so the bishop has to go to protect the pawn and is quite clumsy here. And now knight e3, winning the pawn. Okay, so the king decided to move back. But now knight f5, the knight goes and attacks the pawn like this. And here it again comes in very handy that if the pieces are exchanged, the ending is 1 for black. So knight to h4, black takes all the time to reroute the knight until in the end black wins the pawn. So stage 6 is now completed and was relatively straightforward because stage 6 meant winning the pawn. Black now has a passed pawn and the ending is totally won. So how did the game continue? It's still very instructive, the last stage. White is now finally trying to think about some counterplay, but the bishop is attacked, has to move back, king e2, bishop h2, and now maybe most of us would play just pushing the pawn forward. For example, pawn goes forward, the king tries to get some, well, sorry, probably the bishop would want to go here, and then sacrifice itself against the pawn. And then probably we would go and win the game like this, and it's indeed won, because black is now a piece up. And even though the king is a little bit away, it's an easy win for black. But in this position here, it's very interesting because after bishop h2, f3, bishop g3, Bobby Fischer actually played another very instructive move, knight to e3. And here Anthony Saidy resigned. But what is the point behind this move? The point is that, for example, after king to b3, the knight wants to go to f5, and we want to push this pawn forward, and this bishop is prohibiting us from it. But this bishop is now also attacked by the knight, and this square is controlled by the knight, and those two squares are controlled by the king. So the bishop has to give up this diagonal and allow us to push forward the pawn. So rather than pushing the pawn immediately and then having black sacrifice, the even more elegant solution is to play the knight up here and just simply win the bishop or push the bishop away from that diagonal and convert the pawn. So, by the way, this game of Bobby Fischer, Magnus Carlsen, in one of the interviews in the World Championship against Anand, he said this is his favorite Bobby Fischer game. And it's the game where Bobby Fischer exchanged into an ending with knight against bishop and won the ending. So this is Magnus Carlsen's favorite Bobby Fischer game. So let's have a look again at the game. So black has this opening with white playing the knight to b5, but then black getting a few tempi here and a little bit of pressure together with the isolated pawn. And then basically black exchanges all the pieces, and now also the rook, to reach this ending. And this ending, even though the engines say it's equal, it's very easy to. It's actually, it turns out a very interesting ending. It's an ending that black managed to win by first rerouting the knight so it keeps the pawn on d4 attacked and one of white's pieces busy, stage 1. Then centralizing the king, stage 2, then rerouting a little bit back and forth to reach the time control. Stage 3. And then exchanging some pieces to create space for the king to penetrate, stage 4. Then penetrating with the king to reach a situation where now all the endings where the pieces are exchanged are won for black, stage 5. And then taking all the time to reroute the knight and simply win a pawn, stage 6. And then converting this advantage by taking away all the squares from the bishop, stage 7, and the ending is won. Very instructive game. Thanks a lot for watching and see you around here next time.